So today I'm back at Bedford Cemetery in Bedford Township, here Battle Creek, Michigan. And this is my second video in this location. First one was in the middle of winter, and it's a beautiful spring day. I'm walking around here, and I'm going to see what history I can find. So come along and join me. So in this tour, being that it is Memorial Day weekend when I'm releasing this video, I thought I would not only share with you some local stories from this cemetery, but also try to connect with a broader picture later on in this video of some of the men who died for our country with the connections to Battle Creek as well as Bedford. So let's begin with the story of John Teller. He was born in November of 1831 in New York, and he moved to Michigan prior to the Civil War. He served with the 3rd Regiment, 2nd Michigan Infantry during the Civil War. His regiment saw action at the First Battle of Bull Run, the Second Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Battle of Chancellorsville, the Battle of Gettysburg, and the Battle of the Wilderness, and also the Battle of Cold Harbor. Following the war, he was a long-time resident of Bedford and raised a family of 4 children in the area. He died in August 1910 at the age of 78 at the home of his friends in Battle Creek. Now let's visit the grave of Clara Belle Maynard, which is marked as Clara Belle Face on her monument here. She was born in 1873 in Olivet in Eaton County, and in 1895 she married Charles C. Bowers in Olivet. She and Charles would go on to have 5 children together. Charles passed away in January of 1929, and she would go on to remarry in 1931 Hosea Marchus Face of Maple Rapids in Clinton County. Clara lived in the Battle Creek area for over 45 years. She served as a nurse at the Battle Creek Sanitarium for a lot of that time, and then she became a licensed embalmer for the Farley Funeral Home, where she worked for 23 years. Her son, Charles Maynard Bowers, served with Company A with the 29th Engineers in France and Germany for 22 months during World War I. He passed away in 1925 at the age of 28, following an illness of several months at the American Legion Hospital. Clara was an active member of the Gold Mothers of Battle Creek and a charter member of the General George Custer Post of the American Legion Auxillary. She passed away at the home of her daughter in Port Republic, Maryland in 1966 and was buried here in Bedford Cemetery. Edwin Mcpeek was born in Battle Creek to Irish immigrants in July of 1874 and was better known in his time as Edwin Charles Big Win McPeake to his friends and also his family. He was a well-known farmer in the Bedford Township area for many years. He had enlisted for service and served in the Spanish-American War in 1898. His unit, however, never moved from the mobilization camp before the conflict ended. He died following a stroke in January 1940 at the age of 65. Warren Alonzo Maurer was born in Danville, Pennsylvania in March of 1865. He had enlisted also for the Spanish-American War in 1898 and served with the 32nd Infantry, and following the conflict, he married Flora Louise Stevens of Bronson, Michigan in December of that same year. They were divorced in 1912, and he would remarry Anna Van Sickle, and she would pass away ultimately in 1927. He married a 3rd time to Josephine Sutherland in September of 1928. He had lived in Three Rivers for many years of his life, and a year following his marriage to Josephine, they moved to Battle Creek, and he began working for the Rich Steel Products Company. He was only working there a year when he suffered serious injuries when he was caught in a line shaft at the plant and was unable to work. He had received a settlement from the company. He died in 1936 following a week-long bout with pneumonia at the age of 73. Now let's look at the story of Harold J. Payette. Harold was born in Battle Creek in September of 1891. He went to Battle Creek Central High School and was a popular athlete in football, baseball, and track and field during his time that he was there. He was popularly known as Christy Payette to those who knew him. He grew up in Bedford Township and was considered to be well-educated and quite ambitious. Following his graduation from Battle Creek Central High School, he went to college in Olivet. While at Olivet College, he was a pitcher for the baseball team. And friends remember that he threw a shutout game against their ancient enemy, Albion College, during his time there. One of the few in the history of college athletics in Michigan at that time. He was described by the Battle Creek Moon-Journal in August 1918 as being able to pitch a baseball in a way that inspired his opposing batters with trepidation, as well as being able to crack a joke or tell a funny story in a style to cheer even the most morbid crowd. He later went to Ann Arbor at University of Michigan and studied business administration while still participating in athletics there, before returning to Battle Creek where he worked in the insurance business. When World War I broke out, he enlisted at Camp Custer in 1917 and attended the officers' training camp at Fort Sheridan. There he earned his commission as a lieutenant and then came home for a brief visit with his family. He sailed for France in January of 1918. Because of his marked ability, he was chosen as an instructor in some of the special schools that were established in France by the American government, where he trained other troops. He wrote letters home about his experience in France, but also expressed a desire to be transferred to where the fighting was. He wrote a letter to his mother stating, "The work is going pretty well so far, and is certainly a good experience. I think I shall like it, if they don't forget that I'm here and ready to move. I hope I won't get pigeonholed here for always." On March 25th, he wrote another letter home, which was published on May 5th in the Battle Creek Inquirer, indicating that the Germans had started their offensive and that things were beginning to get interesting. He stated to his parents, "Every day, someone returns from the front and tells about his experiences and the conditions where he was, but they're coming from different points and only know about a very small sector. I can't describe how it makes one wish to be up there where things are happening, when you talk with the fellows just returning." In the Battle Creek Moon-Journal of August 1918, they reported on the death of Lieutenant Harold Payette, not knowing many details of his death. They'd received reports that he was known to always be wanting to lead his men into battle when in action. The clarity of how he died would not come out until much later, when his parents would learn that he was at Chateau Thierry. The Battle of Chateau Thierry, an offensive that began on July 18th, 1918, in Asnières, France, was one of the first actions of the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, under General George Pershing, and was part of the Second Battle of Marne, which was prompted by a German spring offensive. The units that entered the battle were the newest troops on the front in France, and just barely out of basic training. Earlier on June 3rd, the American Expeditionary Forces linked up with the French troops and pushed the Germans back across the Marne River. This set the stage for the Battle of Chateau Thierry, and following that, the Battle of Belleau Wood, which this later action would rage on for 3 weeks and become one of the most brutal conflicts in the war. On July 19th, the day following a huge advance and victory at Chateau Thierry, Lieutenant Payette and another lieutenant from Fort Sheridan were standing on the street discussing the big Allied victory when a bomb fell and killed both of them instantly. His parents would learn about this from a letter by Lieutenant Clifford Rule, who had written of the incident to his parents in northern Michigan, and they in turn would send word of this in the letter that their son had sent to them, to the Payette family. In the same article describing the death of Lieutenant Payette that ran in the Battle Creek Moon-Journal on September 6, 1918, it cites the death of 2 other Battle Creek sons that same month, Charles James Campbell and Guy Stafford. Campbell was a private in the Canadian Mounted Riflemen. He was originally from Dryden in Lapeer County, Michigan, but moved with his parents to Battle Creek at a young age. He was 16 years old at the time he had enlisted with the Canadian Forces and had been in active service for a year. He was known by his friends to be of a roving, adventurous nature and was one of the first among them to be fired up with the spirit of patriotism, and before his parents were aware of the fact, he had enlisted. He had been living away from home at the time, and after a year, they found out about his enlistment and secured his release from the military service. He came home to Battle Creek for a time and worked as a brakeman for the Grand Trunk Railroad, and it is said that the old spirit of his desire to fight in the war overtook him again. He enlisted again in the Canadian Forces 6 weeks later. He had inhaled mustard gas around August 25th in 1918 while fighting on the French front and died in an English hospital on September 1st. He is buried in Cheshire, England, and his headstone bears a Canadian flag on it. Guy Stafford had already been enlisted and serving with the 16th U.S. Regulars Company K and had been in service on the Mexico border when the First World War broke out. He was among the first to go over with Pershing's army, and he had grown up in Battle Creek and was working at the A.B. stove plant before he enlisted. He was killed in the Battle of Soissons in July 1918, and he was buried at Young Cemetery here in Battle Creek with an impressive funeral ceremony complete with full military honors when his remains were returned from France in January of 1921. The American Legion post commander presiding over his service was Fred Zinn. Another man from Battle Creek that I encountered in Oak Hill Cemetery was also killed at Chateau Thierry on the earlier offensive which drove the Germans across the Marne River, as I mentioned earlier. His name was Wayne Drake. He died on June 6th, 3 days into the offense, when the AEF joined the French troops. He was 23 years old, serving with the 2nd Pioneer Engineers with Company C out of Fort Snelling. His 23rd birthday was on board a ship heading to France. Since his arrival there, he had been writing to his parents every 2 to 3 weeks. His last letter, dated May 22nd, only indicated that he had been close to the front, but he gave no other information. Wayne was born in Burlington, Michigan, and moved to Battle Creek when he was 5 years old. He attended public schools here in Battle Creek and had been working as a special night patrol officer with the Grand Trunk Railroad at the time of his enlistment. The story of his tragic death was even more painful for his parents, as they initially did not receive an official word via wire or letter from the military. They learned of his death first from 2 returned letters they had sent to him, which came back stamped with the words "Deceased, killed in action." It was very abrupt and shocking. Because they'd not received an official word from the government, they held out hope for a long time that this was a clerical error. A rumor had been going around town that it was a mix-up with another Battle Creek man serving in France, whose name was Wayne Gray. The postmaster advised his parents to write the adjutant general at Washington, which Mrs. Drake finally did. On August 20th, an article in the Evening News told the story of what ultimately happened to confirm the death of her son. Sergeant Paul Blakesley of Company B, 30th Engineer, came across a body lying almost hidden in tall grass close to the sector of the battle line where a terrific engagement had been in progress the day before. When they went to bury the body, a small book fell out of the pocket of the soldier, and on the ground laying was a group of photographs, thumb-marked and soiled. From the back of one of the photographs, which was a family group photo, the sergeant learned the identity of the man as being Wayne Erving Drake of Battle Creek. Sergeant Blakesley wrote a letter to Mrs. Drake explaining that initially they were not able to find any marks identifying who the soldier was until they found the photos with her name and address on it. He described to her that her son was one of the first men over the top in the charge and gave his life for the country. He was buried on a hillside overlooking a valley, and he had sent official word to headquarters of the identity of Wayne, and his letter to the Drake parents arrived in the mail the same day as the official notice from the government. Following the war, Wayne Drake's body was returned from France, and he is buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. Another local man from Battle Creek was reported in the same newspaper as one of the earlier stories, and his name was Lieutenant Eugene Raynor. He was well known as a local officer from Fort Custer and was well known in the Battle Creek community. He was sent over to France in 1918, and he was killed at Belleau Wood on Sunday, July 21st. His friends received a letter from a Captain Haughey, who was a friend of him, and he was also a medical doctor at the American Field Hospital in France. And he described to his parents how Lieutenant Raynor had been killed while charging the Germans at Belleau Wood, along with 7 other men and 70 other wounded. He had been shot through the abdomen and died the same day, and he was buried in a field along with the others. Finally, another Battle Creek son named James Samuel Gray was well known in the community of Bedford. He was working in the mail delivery service when he enlisted over in Kalamazoo and became a private in the 32nd Michigan 126th Infantry. The last letter from France his parents received was on July 4th, where he stated he was feeling fine and enjoying life. On August 1st, he was reported as missing by the War Department after the Battle of Chateau, Thierry. His body was eventually found months later, and his parents were eventually notified in October that he had been killed in action. He was 27 years old and had gotten married to Marion Scott, an English girl, when he was overseas. He's buried in a British cemetery in France. So I wanted to tell you all of these diverging stories because there are so many men who died from Battle Creek while serving over in France in 1918. In one article, they listed several other names along with Harold Payette, who's buried at Bedford Cemetery. Considering how short of an involvement that the U.S. had in World War I, Battle Creek lost a lot of young men in that conflict, which is best depicted in this stone near the entrance of Oak Hill Cemetery. So as you can see from some of these stories, several of these sons of Battle Creek and Bedford Township also remained buried overseas. So I just wanted to call a little attention to these heroes because it is Memorial Day weekend, and it's always important to never forget the sacrifices that these men made for our nation, and also to never forget the impact it had on their families. So that's going to conclude today's journey through history here at Bedford Township Cemetery. If you liked today's video, please be sure to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, share the video with others, and make sure that you check out my podcast, Tales of Southwest Michigan Past. And as always, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll come along with me next time as we explore some more history.